Hi, I'm Dr. James Hawkey and I'm a lecturer in Spanish and Catalan linguistics at the University of Bristol in the UK. And I'm going to be talking to you today about Valencian linguistics. So, everybody has an opinion about language. When somebody opens their mouth, of course we're listening to what they say, but we're also listening to how they say it. Whether we mean to or not, we judge people for the language they use. What kind of words do they say? What's their accent like? Why do they sound like that? And people do the same with us. You might have been told in the past that the way you speak sounds strange, or silly, or funny. And you might have told people the same thing. So, we often think of some ways of speaking as being languages, and others as simply dialects. Why do we do this? Why do people from Barcelona rarely think that they speak a dialect of Catalan, whereas people from Alacant or Lleida often do? Does it really matter if someone from Barcelona says, "Jo parlo," someone from Valencia says, "Jo parle," and someone from Perpignan says, "Jo parle"? Surely it all means the same thing, right? So, where does all this come from? Why do we do this? Why do people care so much about the way each other sounds? I want you to come away from this lecture thinking about all these different things. Today, we're going to be looking at differences between the different types of Valencian out there, how all this fits in with Catalan, and where all these languages come from. So let's think a bit about where the languages you speak come from. With the exception of Basque and the languages spoken by immigrant communities, all the languages of the Iberian Peninsula are descended from Latin. However, as you all know, Muslim forces conquered the Iberian Peninsula in 711 AD, and full control was regained by the Spanish crown only in 1492. This gradual reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula by the Christians over the course of 8 centuries led to a slightly different linguistic picture than we might have otherwise expected. Let's take a look at this map. This represents the Iberian Peninsula during the early phases of the Reconquista, so around the 9th or 10th centuries. What you see along the north here, along the top, is what we call a dialect continuum. These are all the different varieties that people spoke back then that were descended from Latin. Obviously, these were all a little bit different from one place to the next, hence the change in colours on the map. Each language variety was similar to the ones nearby, but more different to the ones further away from it. If you imagine over 1,000 years ago, people living in somewhere like Galicia wouldn't have had any kind of contact with normal people living somewhere like what is now Catalonia. They're a long way apart, so it's unsurprising that the way they spoke would be different, even if they came from the same source, Latin. So that's the stuff along the north coast of Spain. But what about the rest? So all this grey sandy colour here represents the areas where Mozarabic was spoken. Mozarabic was a language that is no longer spoken today. Like Spanish, Catalan and Valencian, it too was descended from Latin, but contained a lot of influences from Arabic, since Arabic was the official language spoken by many people living there at the time. However, as the Christian forces pushed southwards through the peninsula, they expelled the Arabic speakers. This meant that Mozarabic, with its Arabic influence, gradually gave way to the languages of the people that were pushing down from the north. So let's take a look at this next picture, and this represents today. Okay, so this gives us an idea of what languages in the Iberian Peninsula are like today. You can see that each of these groups of people in the north pushed their way southwards through the peninsula, giving us these three different bands. We have what we now call Galician and Portuguese in the west, in green. We have Spanish in orange in the centre. And we have Catalan and Valencian in red in the east. You can see that Catalan and Valencian are clearly part of the same system. They both developed from varieties of Latin spoken up north in the eastern Pyrenees about 1,000 years ago that then pushed southwards through the peninsula into what is Valencia today. So, we know that Catalan, as spoken in Catalonia, and Valencian are clearly very similar, and a lot of the time they're referred to simply as Catalan. But what are the important differences and similarities between Catalan and Valencian? Obviously, there are many, many similarities between Catalan and Valencian because the two languages are mutually intelligible. A speaker of Catalan can understand a speaker of Valencia and vice versa. But what makes them different? Well, when we're talking about languages, there are three main ways in which they vary. Phonetics, so sound, morphosyntax, so grammar, and lexis, so vocabulary or words. So let's take the language as spoken somewhere like near Barcelona and the language as spoken somewhere near Valencia and see what the differences are in terms of our three different elements: sound, grammar, and vocabulary. Okay, so how does the language sound in Catalonia compared to how it sounds in the País Valencià? All of the examples I'm using today come from the Atlas Interactiu de l'Entonació del Català, which is produced by the Universitat Pompeu Fabra, which you can find online. Just Google it and you'll get lots of examples of how Catalan is spoken in different places. So let's listen to our first example here. And this is from a speaker from Santa Coloma de Farners, between Barcelona and Girona, so up in Catalonia. Let's have a listen to this.
Jaume, què ha portat això? Jaume, què ha portat això?
Listen to the vowels that person said in Jaume, portat, and això. Do they sound the same as you normally hear them in Valencia? Let's listen now to our second speaker saying basically the same thing. This time this person is from Sagunt, so a lot closer to home. Let's listen to them.
Qui ha portat això, Jaume? Qui ha portat això, Jaume?
We can hear that she's Valencian, right? So her sound at the end of Jaume is Jaume, not Jaume. Her sound in portat is portat, not purtat, so o, not u. And her sound in això is ai, això, not això. So we can hear from the second someone opens their mouth that the two languages sound different. Okay, so what about the grammar in Catalonia and Valencia? What are the differences there? Well, I already mentioned one. Verbs look quite different in the different places. So somebody in Valencia, if they wanted to say I speak, would say yo parle, whereas for somebody in Catalonia, it's yo parlo. But it doesn't end there. For example, to say this book in Valencia would be este llibre, but in Catalonia, they'd say aquest llibre. So there are lots of differences in grammar. But what about vocabulary? Well, we all know about that, right? So in Valencia, for example, for the word mirror, you might say espill, whereas in Catalonia they would probably say mirall. For the word for lamb, you might say corder, whereas in parts of Catalonia they might say xai. For to go out, it's eixir or eixir for you in Valencia, whereas in Catalonia it's sortir. A guy is a chic to you, but a noi to them. So we can see that there are differences between Catalonia and Valencia on all three of our levels, on sound, on grammar, and on vocabulary. But there's nothing inherently better about saying sortir than eixir. And there's nothing better about saying jo parlo than jo parle. They're just different. They're just different ways of saying the same thing. And that's what I really want you to think about today. Language varies wherever you go. And the more we know about our language, the more we know about our own culture. So, we've looked at the differences between Catalonia and the País Valencià. But what about within Valencia? If somebody from Barcelona speaks differently to somebody from Valencia, well then surely somebody from Castelló sounds different to somebody from Alacant, right? I mean, they're a long way from one another too. Do you think you could tell them apart? Well, let's see. Let's listen to a few more people who are all Valencian and see if we can guess where they come from. See if you have an idea. Let's listen to this first one.
Vale, Isqui, vaig pa cá al Jardí Major, a la dreta?
Sí,
I quan estiga en el Jardí Major, vaig pa cá l'església de Sant Blai, continue pa cá a la dreta?
sí.
Do they sound like they come from near you? What about this next person? Where do you think they come from?
Hola, bon dia. A veure, voldria arribar al costat de la drogueria, allà al costat de l'estàtua del rei en Jaume. I estic contra la gasolinera. Ara que tindria que tirar cap a dalt o tirar cap al Jardí Major?
Where did you think she was from? Okay, so the first recording was from Mutxamel, near Alacant. The second one were people from San Mateu del Maestrat, right at the north of the province of Castelló, near Vinaròs. Were you close? Could you hear differences between them or not? There are actually quite a few differences between the different types of Valencian, and we're going to look at these now. Starting with the north, we're going to move our way south. Again, remember that wherever possible, we're going to be looking at sound, grammar, and vocabulary. Right, let's start with the north here, looking at the area around Castelló. Now remember, not everyone speaks in the same way I'm going to describe, but some people do. So, something particular to the northern part of the País Valencià is the pronunciation of IX. So take a word like coix, in Spanish, cojo, or caixa, in Spanish, caja. Around Barcelona, these words are pronounced basically the way that I just pronounced them, because that's where I learned Catalan. So, coix and caixa. Coix and caixa. In most parts of the País Valencià, they're pronounced coix and caixa. Coix, caixa. However, in this part of the País Valencià, near Castelló, a lot of people say cois and caixa. Cois, caixa. So with a s sound instead of the sh sound we have everywhere else. So if you know people from there, do you think they might say caixa instead of caixa? Maybe you would say this. And think back to the recording I just played for you just now. The women in the recordings from Sant Mateu del Maestrat, how did they say major in the phrase Jardí Major? Well, the two different recordings said them in different ways. The woman from Alacant said major with the r at the end, whereas the people from Sant Mateu del Maestrat said major without the r. So people at the north of Valencia say things like major as opposed to major. Also, people in this part of Valencia have a lot more in common with Catalonia to the north, so they tend to say things like mol and bon instead of molt and bont with the t pronounced at the end, like in the rest of Valencia. It's normal that these people have things in common with Catalonia just over the border because they're close to them. Like I said before, we sound like the people that are close to us. Turning to grammar, again, we see similarities. So people in the north part of the País Valencià are more likely to say jo parlo as opposed to jo parle. This is because, like I say, they're much closer geographically to places like Tortosa, where they would say jo parlo. They also, like everywhere, have their own words for different things. So, for example, up in the north, you might hear the word farda for squirrel instead of esquirol. Okay, so let's move south a little bit and look at how people speak in the central part of the País Valencià, so around the city of Valencia. In this part of the world, people have a very easily identifiable accent called the pronuncia apichada. Have you heard of this before? Basically, I'll give you an example. For the word house, other areas that speak Valencian would say casa or casa. But in this part of the País Valencià, it's casa. What about the word 13? Well, other areas might say treze or trezza. But in this area, it's trece. Trece. Similarly, you get pronunciations of things like cerma, minchar, plucha, whereas I would be more likely to say germà, manjar, pluja. Do you speak like this? Do you say minchar as opposed to manjar? Would members of your family say this? If so, great. There's nothing better about saying things one way over another. It's all part of how diverse and broad Valencian and Catalan can be. Right, finally, let's go all the way down south to the area around Alacant to see how people speak down there. Like other parts of the País Valencià, some people have their own way of speaking too, and that's the same around here in Alacant. So, let's start with the sound O that we get in words like no or bow. Well, down in that part of the region, it's more likely to be pronounced like ow, so you get now and bow rather than no and bow. Another thing, In all varieties of Valencian, you will often hear people not pronouncing the d sound in words that end in ada or ado. So everywhere, for example, you will hear people saying asha rather than aishada, or mocao instead of mocador. But down near Alacant, this dropping of the D goes one step further. Down there, you can hear people say caída instead of cadira, or sea instead of seda. This might sound funny to people from outside, but it's normal for a lot of people, which again is great. This is all part of the richness of the language. So, do you know anyone that says these things? Do members of your family sound like this? Everyone speaks Valencian differently, and if we understand more about how our language is used, we find more and more out about our culture, which is a wonderful thing. So what have we learned today? Well, we've learned a bit about where Valencian comes from, and we've learned a bit about how it's spoken differently in different places. But most of all, I hope you've come away thinking that all these differences are really interesting, and that your language is rich and varied. If you are interested in these differences, there's a wonderful book called Dialectologia Catalana by Joan Veny and Mar Massanet that I used throughout the presentation today and is absolutely fascinating. So if you want to get that book, find that book. It's a little thing, but I think it's fascinating that in Alacant the number 13 is pronounced 13. In Valencia it's pronounced 13, and in Castelló it's pronounced 13. If there's something for somebody like me from Wales, thousands of miles away, to get interested in, then there's clearly stuff for you to be interested in as well. So, remember, discover your language, discover Valencian, enjoy Valencian, and next time you hear somebody speak differently to you, remember, that's just part of what makes us all human.